Ghosts of Highway. Kaye Turner threw on a t-shirt, long-sleeved pullover and yellow shorts, then laced up her Nikes. She stepped into the sunshine, the frosty air heavy with the scent of ponderosa pine. It was the day before Christmas. Her Timex wristwatch read about 8:15
a.m. She planned an 8-mile run. She'd be back in an hour, in time for breakfast. Kaye and husband, Noel, had joined friends on a holiday getaway at Camp Sherman, a vacation and fly fishing retreat along the pristine Metolius River off Highway 20 with a 2-room school, country store, and 200 year-round residents. The friends shared a meal the night before, then sang carols. Christmas presents Noel bought for his wife were wrapped and in the car. The Turners lived in Eugene, where Kaye, 35, had worked at Planned Parenthood and then as a manager at a local public health agency. Raised in Southern Oregon, she was an only child who remained close to her parents and had recently returned from a visit. Before she left, she had slipped into her father's workshop in the garage, writing, "Hi, Dad. I love you, Kaye," in neat cursive on a yellow legal pad for him to find later. Earlier in the year, she'd finished a marathon, run 2 half marathons, and climbed Mount Washington and 3-finger jack. She talked about her plans to run in Camp Sherman, inviting a friend to join her that morning. The woman demurred. Kaye headed out alone, her feet pounding a two-lane camp road tinged red from volcanic ash. She hadn't been out long when a state highway worker named Thomas Hanna spotted her, running south, alone. Hanna was returning to his place in Camp Sherman after working the night shift. He saw another highway worker driving through Camp Sherman that morning. It was John Ackroyd. By 10 a.m., Kaye hadn't returned. Noel Turner drove through Camp Sherman to look for his wife. Finding no sign of her, he panicked and called police. The memory of an infamous crime, 1 year earlier, was still fresh in Central Oregon. A stranger had driven his pickup over 2 young women as they slept at Klein Falls State Park, less than an hour southeast of Camp Sherman. Armed with an axe or hatchet, he attacked the women, both students at Yale University. They were critically wounded but survived. No one was ever charged. Now, a woman had gone missing, triggering a massive search that made headlines clear to Portland. Husband fears kidnap. Turner searchers losing hope. One read in the Oregonian 4 days later. Ackroyd's name emerged early on. Hanna told police he'd seen both the highway worker and the runner in Camp Sherman that morning. Ackroyd had indeed come across Kaye but didn't go to police, even though he saw posters with her picture at the nearby Santiam Junction Highway compound, where he lived. He mentioned it only after a pair of state police troopers approached him a couple of weeks later. Then 29, Ackroyd had worked for the highway department for nearly a year. He was raised in Sweet Home, a modest logging town along Highway 20. He was the only son of an office worker at the local police department and a maintenance man. He was the middle child between 2 sisters. Ackroyd earned low grades in school. His high school diploma was classmates. Accused of felony theft as a teen, he opted to enlist in the Army and was stationed in Korea, Thailand, and Germany, where he worked as a mechanic. Overseas, he was investigated for selling marijuana and going AWOL. He was caught trying to steal equipment and supplies. He showed signs of a disturbed mind. An acquaintance told a detective how he once watched in horror as Ackroyd, then a young man, hacked up puppies using a machete, saying the dogs were his and nobody else could have them. Later, Ackroyd would drive back roads, shooting squirrels and cutting off their tails. Once home from the Army, he got a state job, where he earned generally positive reviews, though supervisors noted his occasional laziness and frequent time off. Burly and barrel-chested, Ackroyd favored jeans and blue work shirts from the local Sears. His work meant long hours alone on Highway 20, the route that bisects Oregon from east to west. His stretch of it twisted through Bend, logging towns, Corvallis, and onto the coast. Even today, parts of the road are so narrow and quiet the highway has the feel of a country lane. Back then, if traffic was light and his window was rolled down, Ackroyd would have heard the South Santiam River rushing alongside the highway as he headed west out of Sweet Home. He knew how to navigate the hills and hairpin turns during winter, when fierce storms swept through the Cascades. Ackroyd knew, too, the dirt spurs that led off the highway and into the forest. It was on one of them that he'd raped Marlene Gabrielson a year before Kaye Turner disappeared. Ackroyd's first statement to investigators on the Turner case was spare. He was based in Santiam Junction, about 25 miles from Camp Sherman, and said he'd gotten off work at 6:30 a.m. A while later, he drove through the camp, planning to hunt coyotes. He passed by a runner, he told police. Detectives didn't dwell on the highway worker. Instead, they focused on Kaye's husband and possible ties between Kaye's disappearance and extramarital relationships she had with two men at the time. Her calendar at work noted recent liaisons with the men. The day after Christmas, experienced trackers who joined the search made a disturbing discovery in a clearing near the area where Aykroyd saw Kaye. The trackers noticed two sets of footprints preserved in the frozen ground. One resembled the waffle soles of Kaye's Nikes. They mingled with another set that belonged to what appeared to be a large man. The markings indicated a scuffle. The larger person had dragged the smaller person away. Local police didn't put much stock in the accuracy of the tracker's findings. The men were told to drop it. 8 months later, one day in August, Aykroyd walked into the Camp Sherman store. He was anxious and beaded with sweat even though the afternoon heat had faded. The shopkeeper, Christine Weston, recognized him by a half-dozen times since Kaye had gone missing. One of those visits stood out. She discovered him fondling himself while looking at an explicit men's magazine sold at the store. Disgusted, Weston went to find her husband, but Aykroyd was gone by the time the couple returned to confront him. That late summer day, Aykroyd headed straight for Weston. He announced that he'd found Kaye's remains in the nearby woods while hunting rabbits with his dog, though as a seasoned hunter, he must have known the area was an unlikely choice for spotting rabbits. "I'm in real trouble," he confided. "I was the last one to see her alive." Alarmed, Weston went to get her husband, who called state police. Aykroyd led investigators into the brush, about a half-mile off the road where Kaye had gone running the previous winter. This is an entry in Oregon State Police Trooper Clayton Durr's notebook on the day in August 1979 when John Aykroyd walked into the Camp Sherman store and reported finding Kaye Turner's remains. "Why did I have to find her?" Aykroyd said to the shopkeeper. How odd, they thought. A hunter would likely overlook the bits of cloth and bone as nothing more than trash and animal carcasses. What had led Aykroyd to conclude the items in the ponderosa pine thicket were Kaye's? Forensic experts and search and rescue workers spent nearly a week looking for her remains. They found her lower jawbone and yellow shorts, a scrap from her blue pullover, her underwear, and a remnant of the heel from one of her Nikes. They found the other sneaker, mostly intact. Kaye's gold Timex watch with the vinyl band was there, too. Something, likely a struggle, had knocked out the stem, stopping the watch. The time and date stood still. 9:27 a.m. on December 24th. As investigators scoured the woods for clues, a state police trooper rested against a tree. He glanced skyward. High in the lush canopy, he noticed a bird's nest perched on a branch. Something was tangled in the twigs and sticks. It was Kaye's blonde hair. Aykroyd became the prime suspect in Kaye's abduction and murder. Investigators' suspicions deepened as his story began to shift. Initially, he told police he'd passed Kaye without stopping. Now he admitted he'd not only stopped, but also had spoken with her. Over time, Aykroyd added incriminating details to his account. In one stunning development, he revealed that he'd seen Kaye's decomposing remains 2 months after her disappearance, but never thought to call police. He said her body was lying in the same wooded area where scraps of her clothing and bits of bone were found. Her breast had been punctured by a bullet, he said, and her throat was slashed. He claimed he'd reached down to touch the slain woman's arm and hair. The gruesome details implicated Aykroyd and suggested to investigators that he'd returned to Camp Sherman weeks after the killing to check on Kaye's remains. Aykroyd disclosed yet another curious detail. He hadn't been alone on Christmas Eve morning. He said he was with his friend and hunting companion, Roger Dale Beck. The men at first said they'd hunted coyotes, but later changed their stories to say they were poaching deer. Roger Dale Beck said he was poaching deer with his friend John Aykroyd on the morning of Kaye's disappearance. He, too, became a suspect in her murder. Despite all the tantalizing coincidences and Aykroyd's apparent eagerness to place himself at the scene of the crime, investigators could find no physical evidence definitively linking him to the killing. He steadfastly maintained his innocence, admitting only that he had seen Kaye that morning and found her remains. then a confession by a convicted murderer sidetracked detectives before they determined he was lying. Eventually, the investigation stalled. Aykroyd returned to the periphery. It seems remarkable in hindsight that he managed to elude police despite such compelling circumstantial evidence, and his rape a year earlier of another woman off Highway 20. Yet Aykroyd went on working for the state, responding to broken-down cars, clearing wrecks and fixing state rigs along the highway alone. He married a local woman named Linda, and they lived with her young kids, Byron and Rakanda. Beck left Oregon. He was convicted of a sex crime in Minnesota, served 7 months in prison, and moved to California. Kaye Turner's killing became a faded memory. Her case remained unsolved. Detectives moved on. Then Rakanda Pickle, Aykroyd's 13-year-old stepdaughter, disappeared.